Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's so amazing to be able to come to an event like this and not only celebrate the reason why we're here, but also the ability to connect with maybe people that you haven't seen in quite a while. And I see as we're preparing to get to our seats and get started, I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you for being with us on today. Now, would you do something for me? Would you all give yourselves a hand? So I am Celeste Cuffey. I am the owner and president of Life Empowered Consulting Services, where our mission is to reach, empower, and motivate others to access and utilize their God-given talents and skills, building better families, companies, and communities. I am also your host on today. I am grateful for this opportunity. I want to talk to you about today specifically, though. Today is a program that is designed to honor, celebrate the historians, the philanthropists in our history as well as in our community on today. And on today, you may even be challenged through your understanding, and I'm confident that what we hear today will also marinate in our thoughts and our mind and inspire us to action, not only today, but in the days to come. And so today we come together and we gather to celebrate generosity. We gather to envision a more inclusive future and a more equitable future. We discover and recognize the power of philanthropy as we celebrate event philanthropists named by our event sponsors, 9 women who are generous with their financial resources. But what I love about these women is that in addition to their financial resources or their treasure, they also are very generous with their time and their talents. We also gather to launch the celebration of philanthropy in our communities. In the month of November, several area entities celebrate philanthropy and the nonprofit sector. So this is not the only one, it's just one of the first of many, and this is focused on the power of philanthropy. And so to tell us more about the theme, Donna Kleschka of Baird, who is our event chair, will speak with you. Donna, let's give her a hand.
Wow. Thank you, Celeste. Good afternoon and welcome to the Women's Fund event, The Power of Philanthropy. Let's pause for a moment and think about that. What is philanthropy? The easy answer, philanthropy is money presented as a gift to do something good. But let's take that deeper. Let's consider philanthropy as an action that happens over time. Action that is strategic in nature, mindful and directed, focused on addressing systemic issues. Let's say philanthropy is action that transforms attitudes, changes behavior, and shifts culture. This is the power of philanthropy, and that is what the Women's Fund is all about. It's been fun being this year's event committee chair. And ladies, thank you for all of your work to get us here today. A special thanks to Associated Bank, our signature sponsor. I would also like to thank Baird, my employer, for their generous support of my work with the Women's Fund. And thanks to all of you for coming. Please enjoy.
Thank you, Donna. We have a distinct group of individuals and businesses who have made this event possible through their sponsorship. Leading the group, as Donna mentioned, is our signature sponsor, Associated Bank. Now please welcome, yes, it's okay, let's give them a hand. Please welcome Marilka Velez, Senior Vice President of Marketing Services at Associated Bank and an active Women's Fund Board Director.
Thank you very much. So thanks for having me here today. On behalf of Associated Bank, I am so thrilled to be here to support the Women's Fund of Greater Milwaukee and their commitment to the advancement of all women in Milwaukee for generations to come. When I learned the mission of the Women's Fund to advance equity for women, of course, I was compelled to get involved. After all, I have been blessed by many strong female influences in my life. Not only have these women taught me the value of education, but through their hard work and courage, they've ensured opportunities are accessible to other young women, especially ones that look like me. Like the Women's Fund, Associated Bank has a strong history of female leaders who have identified opportunities and pursued those opportunities to help our company and our communities succeed. We value empowering women in our workplace, and we know that these influential women in senior leadership positions play a significant role in ensuring our actions reflect the diverse needs of our communities, our customers, and our employees. Their perception is integral in helping us identify innovative and creative solutions that encourage creativity, positive change within our organization and our communities. In recognition of these efforts, we are proud to support the Women's Fund of Greater Milwaukee and recognize all of today's honorees, especially Rachel Monica Wilcox, for being generous agents of change. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilka. And of course, we extend our deepest gratitude to all the event sponsors that are listed on the screens and in your event program. Each of you have demonstrated a commitment to equity for women, and for that, we thank you. With Associated Bank as our signature sponsor, we have permission, so to speak, to talk about money as a tool. In our case, it's a bold statement about a tool for change. As many of you know, the Women's Fund of Greater Milwaukee, which is one of 15 funds in Wisconsin, is committed to activating philanthropy to advance equity for women in our community. And now we'll hear more about the Women's Fund from Nancy Peterson, Board Chair. Nancy is a partner and executive committee member at Qualls & Brady. She has worked closely with Lisa Antonito, who was named the executive director of the fund exactly 2 years ago today. Happy anniversary. That's good. Together, their passion and leadership has reintroduced the Women's Fund to the community. It is engaging more people, working to provide more grants, and creating connectivity that inspires action. We'll hear from Lisa later, but for now, please welcome Nancy Peterson.
Well, thank you, Celeste, and thanks to all of you for being here today. I have had the pleasure of meeting several times our speaker, Joan Marie Johnson, and can say that I learned from her that the path to equity is one that will require a lot of sustained effort by many individuals, and I'm guessing a lot of those individuals are in this room. For us, the genesis was our founding mothers who created the Women's Fund in 1985. That's a while back, but in the meantime, many other women in this room and outside this room have contributed to our efforts to funding our endowment and to contributing their time and energy to events like this. Well, today, let's hear a little bit more about the Women's Fund focus. For one thing, we still give grants. Our focus is on economic empowerment for women, on leadership training for women. When we look at a lot of grant requests, we see a lot of innovation, ideas for seeds of projects that might grow in the future, and that's what we really try to focus on. We also award scholarships to women who are non-traditional students, age 35 or older, who are first pursuing their bachelor degrees. So think about what it does for their families when they can come home with a new degree and opportunities for a new job and place in the community. And then one of our last focuses is programming like this, where we hope to inspire others. We also put on what we call community talkbacks throughout the year. So if what you hear and experience today resonates with you or you think matches your company's philosophy, we invite you to continue to support us with your time and your talent. Recently, we launched what we're calling Equity Campaign 2020. That date is picked to honor and think about celebrating the 100th year anniversary of the 19th Amendment, giving us all the right to vote. Joan will tell you a little bit more about that. Yeah, let's go for that. So partly that'll be a celebration, but partly we're thinking, okay, when will we achieve equity? Will it take another 100 years? Let's hope not. But it really motivated us to say, let's put together a capital campaign, see what we can do, and have greater impact in our community. So we hope you will learn more about that by looking at our website. I think there's something in your program, and I invite you to join me in making a gift. And then, of course, on the gift side, we'd also love it if you would designate the Women's Fund when you make your annual contribution through United Way. We know that campaign is ongoing now. And then finally, before you continue to enjoy your table and eat, I'd like to acknowledge our board of directors. I know I've seen many of them here today. I so thank you for everything you do for this organization, and it's an honor and a delight to serve with you. And then Donna, wherever you've gone, thank you so much for all of your planning and organization of today, and all of your event committee members I know contributed a lot too. So thank you. And now I guess we'll enjoy our company and eating, and Celeste will be back in a little bit to tell you more about the rest of the program.
But I am so excited that we have our keynote speaker with us on today. And our keynote address will be by Ms. Joan Marie Johnson. Can you all hear me okay? Wonderful. Our keynote address will be by Ms. Joan Marie Johnson. Joan is a historian, an author, and a storyteller. You can read Joan's full bio in the program, though I do want to mention that she has been to Milwaukee and Wisconsin before. Her stories will help us to get to know our history more intimately, and more importantly, how women wielded their social and financial power to make change and advance equity for women. So please, if you don't mind, put your forks down for just one moment. Thank you so much, and let's give a big warm welcome for Ms. Joan Marie Johnson.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Can you all hear me? Thank you to Lisa and Donna and everyone at the Women's Fund for inviting me. I'm just delighted to be here to share the history of the power of philanthropy with you. And I want to start in 1891 when M. Carey Thomas dashed off a letter to her best friend and life partner, Mary Garrett. Thomas and Garrett were both wealthy women growing up in Baltimore together, the daughters of wealthy businessmen. And they knew that Johns Hopkins University was looking to open a medical school. So Garrett and Thomas offered $100,000 to the university in 1891 if they would open that medical school on the same terms for women as for men. However, I'm not sure how well you can see the letter, but Mr. Gilman, who was president of Johns Hopkins University, M. Carey told Mary, "Mr. Gilman is working against us tooth and nail." And you can see up here, you do not realize Mr. Gilman's grim determination. It is with him a death struggle, and money weighs nothing with him. Unless the medical school opens in a year or two, it will open without women. Could Garrett and Thomas successfully leverage the power of philanthropy to open the doors to the medical school to women as well as men and work towards advancing equity for women in the 1890s? Thomas and Garrett were part of a cohort of women in the late 19th and early 20th century who donated thousands and in some cases even millions of dollars to substantially fund the women's movement. So they were expanding access to higher education for women. They were working to fund the women's suffrage movement to get the right to vote. And they were working also to support what was then called the birth control movement for reproductive rights for women, as well as to work with working women in the labor movement. In my book, Funding Feminism, I make two central arguments about this. They're both quite simple, but I think they're both very important, and I hope will be inspiring to us today. First of all, that women have to make change for women. And as I look out at all of these tables, male allies were very important, but they simply weren't giving enough money to advance women's causes. Women had to give larger gifts to really make available the kind of philanthropy that was necessary to make change for women and to really have that kind of impact. Women outnumbered men in donations and dollars and as major donors. So women's philanthropy really enabled change for women. The second point that I make is that these contributions also sometimes exposed disunity within the women's movement. And therefore, I hope they can inspire us to more impactful and inclusive philanthropy today. So you had wealthy women who were wielding their power within women's organizations, causing others in the organizations to ask, is there really room for inequality within a movement for equality? Furthermore, were all women's dollars welcome? Could the movement be inclusive across class, across religion, across race? Could the movement bring equality to all women? Women had long been generous and charitable. We have the image of Lady Bountiful, who met the needs of those neighbors around her with that kind of immediate giving and social services. But in the late 19th century, there was a movement towards what we call scientific philanthropy, which will be very familiar to you today, and that is to really using the donations of industrialists like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. They were setting up large foundations to really make change, to be much more scientific and efficient and impactful in their giving, and to get at the root cause of disease, the root cause of poverty. At the same time, women were becoming much more active in the women's movement. So in 1848, the first women's rights convention in the world was held in Seneca Falls, New York. And it was followed by women organizing in every kind of organization you can think of, from their churches to their women's clubs to temperance unions to fraternal orders. And they were working to better society around them as well as on their own rights and beginning to demand the right to vote. So wealthy women capitalized on both these developments, scientific philanthropy as well as the growing women's movement. And they began to give really large amounts of money to transform women's position in society. Wielding power with their money, they believed their efforts would fundamentally alter women's opportunities and women could finally gain equality with men. So what I'd like to do is share a few stories of who some of those women were and the enormous impact they had, as well as what they can tell us about the women's movement today. So let's go back to Mary Garrett. She was the daughter of John W. Garrett, who was a railroad tycoon. He owned the B&O Railroad, which you might remember from your Monopoly playing days. When he died, she inherited $6 million in the 1880s, which is the equivalent of about $150 million today. So she was a very wealthy, privileged young woman in Baltimore. However, despite all of that privilege that she had, her brother went to college. Mary was not allowed to go to college. Her brother was invited to work in the family business. Mary was not allowed to work in the family business. Her brother was allowed to control the family investments, and Mary was not. So she decided that she really wanted to work for women's equality, for their access to education, to employment, and to political equality as well, which is how we have her dangling that $100,000 offer to Johns Hopkins University. Well, Mr. Gilman was pretty grimly determined not to allow women to attend, but when she upped it to $500,000, that determination kind of melted away, and Johns Hopkins Medical School opened on the same terms to men as to women. A couple things about that work that she did. First of all, she gave $350,000 of the $500,000 herself, so her own personal impact was enormous. But she also organized women around the country. She had committees around the country of women who were making donations, including right here in Milwaukee. This was one of the 15 or so committees around the country raising money. And if you look at these names, you might notice that many of them are familiar if you're familiar with the Women's Club of Wisconsin. The presidents, the founders, and the members of that club are all over this list. There are really too many for me to name. Merrill, Chapman, Vetter, Mitchell, Camp, Miller, Fitch, Metcalf, Hiles, Kramer, Field, Flint, Aiken, Brigham, Slaister, and I'm sure I missed a couple. This club was at the forefront of improving opportunities for education and self-improvement for women, as well as having a history of raising money for many worthy causes, many of which were related to education and to children. And I have to say that when Debbie Patel sent me a history of the club, I was truly inspired by Miss Mary Mortimer, principal and teacher at Milwaukee Women's College, first secretary of the club, who declared that the club was rebelling against the modest retired woman, and have come out in this 19th century to declare that they have as much right to walk in the sunlight as their brother. Now, Garrett also believed, in political equality. So she was a big friend and supporter of Susan B. Anthony. And just before her death, Susan B. Anthony asked Mary Garrett and M. Carey Thomas to raise a fund for the National Organization for Suffrage. And they did. It was a 5-year fund. And that really put the national organization on much stronger footing. And what's notable about all those 600 plus donors to the medical school fund, as well as the smaller group of major donors that she had for the Women's Suffrage Association, is that 90% plus were women. So women were making change for women. Another Susan B. Anthony friend and supporter is Jane Stanford. She also came to the movement from her position as someone who was very wealthy but felt her lack of privilege as a woman, her gender discrimination. When her 15-year-old son died, sadly, she and her husband founded Leland Stanford Junior University. 2 years after the university was founded, her husband died, and she inherited what would be the equivalent of probably about $500 million in today's terms. So she was a very wealthy woman. She inherited her husband's share of the railroad that he had been president of, and when she went to that railroad to ask for railroad passes that she could share with the suffragists who were going city to city to give speeches, they wouldn't give them to her, and she had to get her brother to ask for the passes. So she wrote to Susan B. Anthony, and she said it was because of being a woman. Could I vote and wear trousers, I would enjoy more rights. Garrett and Stanford, I think, are also important because, like many of the women in the book, they understood how related all of these causes were, that women needed access to higher education, they needed access to employment, they needed access to financial independence, and they needed political equality. Being that this was the time when the movement for the right to vote was really heating up, they believed that the vote would be a tool which would then allow them to have all of these other areas of equality, that getting the right to vote would elevate their status in society and bring them all these other rights. Now, interestingly, Melinda Gates, I think, also sees these connections. Although she would, 100 years after we've gotten the right to vote, she would put financial independence and economic empowerment first and see that other rights would follow. So in this quote here, after she donated $170 million for women's economic empowerment, she's talking about when women in India were allowed to work outside of the home, the ways in which this really changed men's perception of them, and they could then begin to change some unwritten rules about women and really change their lives. Another philanthropist who was extremely important and also saw all of these connections is Mary Richardson Jones. She was part of a small group of black families in Chicago as early as the 1840s, and she was a supporter of the Underground Railroad there. Her husband was a successful tailor and real estate investor, and when he died in 1879, she was left with an inheritance of $50,000, well over $1 million in today's terms. So she began giving very generously to black self-help groups in Chicago, in particular for women's groups, to a women's club eventually named after Ida B. Wells, and as you can see, the Phyllis Wheatley Club, which formed a home, and this was for working women before the YWC opened its doors to blacks in Chicago. She also, like the other women I've been talking about, understood again these connections: economic independence, access to education, political equality. So in just before 1890, a young black woman in Chicago wanted to get nurses training so she could become a nurse, and none of the nurses training schools would admit her. So Mary Jones gave the substantial funding, along with several others in the city, to open a new hospital for blacks, Provident Hospital, which also had a nurses training school, and for many years was the only place that black women could get that kind of training in Chicago. Furthermore, she made that connection with political equality, and she too was a friend of Susan B. Anthony's and hosted Susan B. Anthony in her home. I don't, however, have a record of her giving to the national suffrage associations because, as many of you will know, at that time, they were not always welcoming to African Americans. There were times in which we see black women speaking at conventions and being welcomed, but there were many incidents of racism and moments where they were excluded. So women like Mary Jones and other black philanthropists like her were giving money to black suffrage associations like the Alpha Suffrage Club in Chicago. On the bottom left is a group in Texas, and on the bottom right is a group in Buffalo, New York. Another suffragist who saw many of the same connections is Alva Vanderbilt Belmont. She came to the movement resenting her lack of power as a woman. She had married into the Vanderbilt family, and in that very high society in the Gilded Age, late 19th century New York, her husband, Mr. Vanderbilt, was actually cheating on her, and he was being pretty open about it. And in that very tight society, she really felt like she had no recourse, that it was not proper for a woman like her to get a divorce. And she was humiliated by the way he treated her. So what did she do? Well, she joined the suffrage movement. I apologize for all these clickings. And she was a very generous and important and impactful donor. I wanted to share this list with you. It's a hand typewritten book of over 200 pages of donors to the National Women's Party, which was the second biggest national organization for women's suffrage. And a couple things to note. First of all, I hope you can see that they recorded every single person who donated. Every gift was critical, from 50 cents to $1 to $2, all the way up to the one that has a lot of decimal places, which is Alva Belmont. And as you can see, she gave well over $76,000 and really had an enormous impact in the movement. In addition, you may be able to see that these were all women. In that list, the vast majority of the small donors as well as the large donors were women. Now, Alva was important because she also understood the power of publicity. She had a big personality. She loved speaking out to the press, and she loved coming up with really creative, much more public ideas. So on the top, you can see there she is with Susan B. Anthony's desk. And on the bottom, that's her mansion in Newport, Rhode Island, which is where New York's high society summered. And she had this great idea that they would have a day where for $5 you could get a tour of the mansion, which was really an amazing thing. Nobody was allowed in these personal homes, private homes. But when you came out in the backyard, there was a suffrage rally. And you ended up hearing some speeches and going home with a booklet on suffrage. So Alva had a lot of great ideas. She understood, as she thought about publicity, she also was not happy that when she joined the movement in 1909, the headquarters were actually at the desk in the house of the treasurer who lived in Warren, Ohio. So here's Mrs. Vanderbilt Belmont, right, coming in from New York, and the national headquarters are at a desk in Warren, Ohio. So she looked askance at that and thought they really needed to come to New York where they could get a lot more publicity. She offered $7,000 to the organization, but it was contingent on the fact that they moved their headquarters. So it was quite interesting the way she wielded her power with her money to make these kinds of demands. And you will not be surprised to find out that Harriet Upton, that treasurer living in Warren, soon after resigned. Many of the working class and middle class women within the movement resented it when there was this kind of inequality within this movement working towards equality. And they really wanted that power to be shared. What makes that so interesting is that Alva really herself felt a kind of sisterhood, or wanted to experience sisterhood with all women, regardless of class, regardless of race, regardless of religion or identity. She really felt that, having been humiliated by her husband, that she had something in common with all other women, that there was some kind of notion of sisterhood where women needed to come together and reject the sexism they experienced, no matter who they were, to gain political power, to gain financial empowerment, and to gain access to better employment and education. And this is really a key point. Women throughout my book tried to espouse this sense of sisterhood. And many of them, like Alva, supported working women, particularly garment workers, who went on a major strike in New York. It's called the Uprising of the 20,000, or the Shirtwaist Strike, in 1909. And she gave money to get them out of jail. She held a rally at the Hippodrome, where again you had to listen to suffrage speeches, but to raise money for these women. And she really talked about what they had in common. She also tried to work with African American women in New York. She held a meeting with 2 black women. Afterwards, they had a big meeting with over 100 black suffragists, and she opened up a branch of her organization in Harlem and paid the rent for them. But I have to say that notably, these women were already organized by Sarah Garnett, who had founded the Brooklyn Equal Suffrage League back in the 1880s and had initiated that contact with Alva. Furthermore, Alva eventually decided that the issues that black women were facing had more to do with race than they did with gender. And so what we can see is she did not have that kind of understanding of intersectionality that we have today. She didn't successfully expand her ideas about sisterhood across race. And ultimately, I think that failure of leadership by Alva and other women in the suffrage movement, other white women in the suffrage movement, should be a challenge for us today. Even more important than Alva Belmont in terms of the sheer amount of money and impact that she had on the suffrage movement is Mrs. Frank Leslie. And I call her Mrs. Frank Leslie because that's what she called herself. She changed her name after her husband died to Frank Leslie. He owned a publishing empire, a whole series of magazines. And after he died, she took that empire and really built it up and was very successful. She was donating about $100 annually to the suffrage movement. And when she died, she left it all to the National Association for Suffrage, to Carrie Chapman Catt, who became the president. It was about $1.7 million. After her relatives and lawyers got a hold of it, Carrie Chapman Catt was left with about $1 million. And to put that into perspective, the year before, the entire budget for the whole national organization was $38,000. So they went from $38,000 to $1 million. And boy, did that open some doors for them. Just imagine what they could do. The first thing that Carrie Chapman Catt said was, we really need to have what she called an education campaign. In other words, a big publicity campaign. And so she hired 25 full-time women publicists, and they sent out cartoons and editorials and press releases, statistics, all kinds of information. They also bought the Woman's Journal, which had been failing. It was losing money. And in the first year, they spent $75,000, converted it into the Woman Citizen, and had their own magazine. And at the time, this was really quite important because, for example, the New York Times was conservative and against women's suffrage. So for women to get their voices out there, they really had to own their own media. And being able to spend $75,000 on that magazine alone after their entire budget had been $38,000 was really important. They also had what they called the Stunts Bureau that paid for the parades, the automobiles. It was the National Women's Party, not NASA, but the other organization that had the pickets at the White House. But what you can see is that women were really elevating their demands and finally getting the kind of attention that they needed to get the 19th Amendment passed in 1920. They also began to work on, rather than just going state by state, on getting that national amendment passed, which means they had to go to Washington. So in addition to that nice new New York headquarters, they also needed a headquarters in Washington, D.C., which Catt was able to pay for with that bequest. And she hired full-time lobbyists in Washington as well. So as we've seen, women philanthropists had enormous impact. They paid for those new tactics and strategies and supported widening access to women's economic empowerment and educational opportunities. The power of philanthropy is evident in the changes they enabled. Today, it remains vital that women make change for themselves towards women's equality. Women's investments in women's rights is essential. Large donations, small donations. The March on Washington, for example, they had an online campaign and had over 38,000 donors raising $2 million, which is really about a $50 donation. So those small donations are also extremely impactful, especially today since we have the power of those kinds of online campaigns. Women's giving is also essential to bringing men into the room. Today, individual donors to most organizations dedicated to advancing women and girls are largely other women, over 90% of individual donors. Men are valuable allies, but they simply have not in the past been giving as much to women's causes as women's do. So if we look at the women's suffrage movement, the men who gave because of their mothers, they gave because their wives were active, they gave because of their sisters or their daughters. So women today must give until and so that men will follow and support women and girls also. Today it's also vital that we work harder to unify women across race, religion, sexuality, class, and other identities. In 1920, when the 19th Amendment passed, Black women across the South organized, and you can see a group organizing here, and went to register to vote, but many, many were turned away. So they were not enfranchised along with white women. In addition, this is Mabel Lee. She was a Chinese immigrant living in New York, and she was a very big supporter of the suffrage movement. Her picture was in the newspaper because she was in the 1912 suffrage parade. And afterwards, she went on to get a PhD. She was very successful. But as a Chinese immigrant, Asian immigrants to the United States were not allowed to naturalize to citizenship until 1943. And so in 1920, she was not allowed to naturalize or to vote, and historians have not been able to find out if after 1943 she ultimately was ever able to naturalize and vote. So I want to leave you with a challenge. How can you build on the philanthropy of Mary Garrett and Mary Jones? How can you wield the power of philanthropy? Are you supporting the Women's Fund of Greater Milwaukee's priorities, which are going to sound really familiar? Economic empowerment, leadership development, and education for women. And I'm going to say, I wrote my talk, and then I went on the website, and I thought, wow, what a coincidence. Can you stand on Alva Belmont's shoulders and vote and support women candidates for office? Can we do better today to ensure that our dollars lift all women and girls, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, and other identities? As Mary Mortimer said, let's walk in the sunlight. Let's march together to advance equity for women. Thank you.
Wasn't that amazing? Wasn't that amazing? Let's give her another hand. Did we learn something new today? Were we challenged today? Did we have to take a moment and think about what role we play and what role we will play? Something to think about, huh? Well, I'm so excited that was great. Thank you again, Joan. Thank you. And we just walked through history, meeting influential women who marched in the streets. They strategized and fought for the issues that they were so passionate about. And how can you do the very same thing? And she left us with a challenge, but let me restate it. How do we emulate those things that we saw there for the issues that are important to us? How do we make change? Now, I'm sure that we can agree that in these last few days ahead of the midterm elections, we must honor the work of these amazing women by exercising our right to vote. Isn't that right? Any early voters in the room, we're going to celebrate you for being proactive and saving yourself some time in line. Let's just, give it up. And perhaps adding to that, would you also encourage someone else to do the same? Make sure you get out to vote. And it seems as though this is an appropriate tribute to the women of the 20th century. But now what I'd like to do is, we are ready now to recognize the amazing group of 9 community philanthropists named by our event sponsors. Each woman is being honored for her commitment to philanthropy and her ability to transform attitudes, influence behaviors, and make change for others, ultimately having impact. After hearing their bios and reading about their philanthropy in the event program, you will surely admire them, understand why they were chosen, and hopefully be inspired to emulate them as well. So I have 2 honorees that I want to talk about. They are not here with us on today, but I want to start with them. The first one is Holly Baumgart, VP of Information Technology from Sargento Foods. She's named by Kane Community Group. I am looking for the other 7. I guess we'll take a few moments so that they can finish getting settled so that they can prepare to come up. But I want to jump back in with Holly. She earned her master's degree in accounting and finance from the University of Notre Dame. She also obtained her MBA from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University, and Holly is currently pursuing a master's degree in sustainability from Harvard University. Holly serves on the board of directors of Chicago Commons and Feeding Mouths, Filling Minds. Outside of the office, Holly is an adventurer, a traveler who has visited more than 80 countries. Holly is a mother of a spunky 3-year-old daughter named London. She believes that women can really have it all. Congratulations, Holly. Let's give her a hand. The next honoree is Joanne McGrath of Highland Street Foundation. Joanne has been a generous philanthropist for decades. The Highland Street Foundation is committed to addressing the most pressing needs and concerns for children and families. They provide access and opportunities in education, housing, mentorship, healthcare, environment, and the arts. Her generosity to Alverno College is unmatched. In 2012, Alverno was proud to introduce the Joanne McGrath School of Nursing in recognition of her extraordinary gift to her alma mater. Congratulations, Joanne. Now, to the philanthropists who are with us today. Nancy, Donna, thank you so much. We're missing Nancy. We're all good? Our very first is Jane Durment, CIO Emeritus of Marcus Corporation. Jane Durment has more than 20 years of experience working for technology vendors with responsibilities including consulting, customer support, strategic planning, risk management, project planning, and major accounting marketing. Jane served as Chief Information Officer at the Marcus Corporation, leading the technology efforts for Marcus Theaters and Marcus Hotels and Resorts for 16 years before retiring in 2012. Jane is also a committed United Way volunteer and leader in her community. For the last 7 years, she has been the driving force behind United Way IT United Network, which now raises $1.2 million. All right, Jane. Jane is also a member of United Way's Women's Leadership Council, Education Advisory Committee, Volunteer Engagement Committee, and Milwaukee Succeeds, Goal 3 Network for College Access and Success. Jane is not doing a thing. She's just sitting around. Jane is actively involved with the Boys and Girls Club, the Girl Scouts STEM programs with MPS and their STEM partners with MATC and in advisory capacity, and with IC Stars as a career coach. Congratulations, Jane. And now I'd like to introduce Kristen Havlick. Let's give her a hand. From Foley and Lardner, named by Foley. Named by Foley, Kristen is of counsel and a business lawyer with Foley and Lardner LLP. She focuses on business succession planning, asset protection planning, and complex estate planning. Kristen has an extensive experience in counseling clients regarding estate planning, minimization of estate taxes, and charitable giving, and has drafted numerous estate plans, including wills, trusts, power of attorneys, living wills, marital property agreements, and other estate planning arrangements. Congratulations, Kristen. And now, Joan Robertson. Did you all see her wave? They're going to come down to her. Now, they've just told all of Joan's business when I read this, so I apologize, Joan. She was born in 1916 and is an inspiration. I know some people are concerned about their age being exposed, but she takes pride, and we salute you for that. At that time, Annette Robertson, her mother, was marching with social reformist Jane Addams in Chicago. As we just heard, that was at the height of the suffrage movement and 4 years before the 19th Amendment was ratified. Joan, who has 5 children and 10 grandchildren, is quick to credit family and colleagues in the social reform and philanthropic community for her inspiration. A self-proclaimed news junkie, Joan says she is blessed to have the means to still find great interest in the world. It's how she stays 102 years young. Optimistic that, in her words, the good in man will supersede the evil around us. Congratulations, Joan. Absolutely, she is worthy of a standing ovation. And just to say that again, the good in man will supersede the evil around us. So now I am going to call up Ms. Patty Keating Kahn. CEO, PK2 Group. Named by Quarles and Brady, Patty Keating Kahn has a reputation for getting things done in our community. Patty is a real estate developer and is currently co-chairing the capital campaign that will restore historic buildings at the Milwaukee VA. All right, Ms. Patty. Part of her fundraising there is devoted to creating the first designated wing for homeless women veterans. Change makers. Patty is also the chair-elect of the Board of Directors of Milwaukee Film, where she is helping raise funds to restore a local treasure, the Oriental Theater. We have some people on your side. As a philanthropist herself, she has been a long-term financial supporter of many other organizations as well, including the Girl Scouts, Renaissance Theater, and the Women Lead. And she has created a fund at the Greater Milwaukee Foundation to give back for years to come. Congratulations, Patty. Jean Kreiser. Strategic Change Manager for Baird. Named by Baird, Jean Kreiser's career has spanned 34 years at Baird, where she currently serves as a Strategic Change Manager. Both Jean and Baird share a commitment to the community through giving back. She has been a member of the Junior League of Milwaukee since 1991. Since 1993, Jean has been on the board of the Wings of Corporate Love, an organization established by several Baird employees to host special events for special needs children and adults. Jean is a strong supporter of the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, known as JDRF. Wings of Corporate Love, United Way, and the United Performing Arts Fund. JDRF holds a special place in Jean's heart where she supports many fundraising events. The most challenging and rewarding has been participating in 5 long-distance rides to cure diabetes from Death Valley to the Canadian Rockies. Congratulations, Jean.
So you're writing, yes.
I don't want to ask in a mic. It's a bicycle. Wait a minute. That's a whole nother conversation. I guess. Rachel Monaco Wilcox. Founder and CEO, Lotus Legal Clinic. Named by Associated Bank, Rachel applies her talents in so many ways: leader, legal innovator, teacher, and attorney. As the CEO and founder of Lotus Legal Clinic, Rachel oversees the vision and operations of women's only free legal clinic that serves only victims of gender-based violence and human trafficking. Lotus provides, yes. And we're all very clear that that's an issue here in Wisconsin, so thank you for that. Lotus provides direct, comprehensive legal services, advocacy, community education, and invests in survivors as change agents. Rachel has also served as chair of the Justice Department and as an assistant professor at Mount Mary University. In her solo legal practice, Rachel provides estate planning and elder law services with a focus in elder mediation. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in English and Theology from Marquette University and a Doctor of Law degree from Marquette Law School. Congratulations, Rachel. And the last honoree is Deb Rosner. Vice President, Commercial Banking, BMO Harris Bank. Named by BMO Wealth Management, Deborah Rosner is Vice President of Commercial Banking for BMO Harris Bank. In this role, Deb serves her commercial clients' lending and treasury management needs. Deb joined BMO Harris Bank in 2016. Previously, Deb was at Bank Mutual Corporation in Milwaukee and Harris Bank in Chicago. Deb is active in the community and passionate about giving back, serving on the board of directors of the Women's Fund of Greater Milwaukee. A graduate of the University of Kentucky with a degree in finance, Deb and her husband currently reside in Fox Point, Wisconsin. They have 3 daughters, Emily, Megan, and Sally. Congratulations. So I'm just going to take a moment to take it all in. You guys go ahead and take your moment take it all in because that was absolutely amazing. I always say we don't know who we're sitting next to in the room. We don't know the power that we have when we have a simple conversation. We just created a new job opportunity over here between Joan and Joanne just by having a very simple conversation and getting to know each other. And so we are in a room with some amazing, incredible, talented, accomplished, committed, and generous women. And I just want to take a moment again, and I want you all to help me to congratulate them and to thank them again. So please join me in a collective applause to express our gratitude. And I want to say also, it was definitely an honor and a pleasure to serve each of you on today. And can we also take a moment to say thank you for those that are preparing our food, serving our food. We appreciate them as well. And now I want to turn it over into the hands of Lisa Antonito, Executive Director of the Women's Fund. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Of course, thank you, Celeste. You did a marvelous job moving the program along. We know that's a big task. For anyone that's ever been the MC, she carries the weight of the event once we get here. So thank you, Celeste. Of course, congratulations to all of the honorees and the philanthropists. I'm sure there are dozens more worthy of recognition and honor today. So by all means, we are thrilled that Milwaukee is such a generous community. I'm sure that my other nonprofit friends would echo that even when we go nationally and talk to our peers and colleagues from other entities that are in our same federation or organizations, we find that Milwaukee has a very generous community. So thank you for being philanthropists, all and every one of you. Because we have a few extra minutes, I invited Joan back to the podium to see if there was a question from the audience. We have time for a couple of questions, so I'm sure her inspiring presentation and comments might have sparked something. So I want to just give you each a moment to think about what you might hear from Joan. Did anyone have a question? I asked her to come up here because I said if she came up, maybe somebody would have a question. Oh, of course! Joan has a question.
Seneca Falls.
Go ahead. So the mic guy brought it over, but a little bit late. So I just want to repeat Joan's words. So these are Joan's words. She says it's not a question, it's a comment. She expresses her gratitude for telling the stories of the suffragettes and the women's movement. She says that her mother knew many of the names that Joan mentioned. And as I said, Joan introduces us and tells us about these people as if they're her friends. Well, they were Joan's mother's friends, which is kind of cool. And then she said that she was thrilled to be here and a part of the event. So thank you for your comments, Joan. Thanks for coming. Another round of applause for Joan. So I had the chance to meet Joan when we came. I went to her house when she was interviewed by the reporter at WUWM. For the Lake Effect program, and I said to Joan this morning, I said, I feel like you're my grandmother, my mother, my sister, and my friend all wrapped up into one. So thrilled to have you here. Any other questions? I saw some other hands. You've had some time. Anne-Marie? Oh, thank you for the mic.
Thank you for an excellent program and an excellent presentation. I have a question about what did you learn about women who supported women artists or supported the arts in your research? Oh. I know that's another book, but.
That is another book. There were a lot of individual women who were supporting the arts through all kinds of ways. So one of Margaret Sanger's closest supporters in the birth control movement actually supported filmmaking. and this is back in the 1920s. Another major suffragist in New York City was a patron of the visual arts. She had very many paintings, which ended up in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the only time she opened them up personally was to raise money for the suffrage movement. So women were certainly supporting a variety of writers, artists, painters. I don't know as much about that as I would like to, but that's inspiration for another book, so thank you.
So you've offered us a wonderful perspective on history and where we've come from. We've come a long way, right? What do you feel our biggest goal should be in the next 20 years? What do you feel our biggest goals should be in the next 20 years, or benchmarks for success as women that will take us further than we've ever dreamed?
That's such an interesting question about what we should be working on now to really advance equity, because it's really the same thing, I think. We really need to get, we have the right to vote, but we need to utilize it and have women in much more power politically. That's absolutely crucial. We're still working on reproductive rights. We've widened access to education considerably, and the Women's Fund is doing that as well, but women are still kind of getting squeezed out of the pipeline along the way in employment, and so that's really important. So I think really those same general kinds of areas are still very important, and I also like that general sense that women 100 years ago had, that if we could really gain some of these rights, that we would elevate women's status in society and just really all be treated better, more equally. And so I think that's still the larger goal.
Well, in the interest in time, thank you, Joan. I imagine when you have a history teacher as the keynote speaker that she could go on and on, tell us stories. So she is available. Daniel from Boswell Books is with us with a collection of books, including Joan's. Joan is available for autographs as well. If you purchase a book, she's happy to sign it for your holiday gift giving or maybe your personal collection. I want to again pay special thanks to my new friends at Associated Bank. We're getting to know each other now. We've done several things together, and I really appreciate the support from Associated Bank today and every day. It's the better half of banking, right? The better experience. I'm working on that. I'm not an Associated Bank employee yet, but I will know that phrase eventually. So thanks everyone for coming. I'm thrilled that you came to experience the Power of Philanthropy. I wish you well. Enjoy the afternoon, and of course, vote on Tuesday if you haven't already. Thanks again. Bye now.